Hey JavaScript students, it's Dr. Tracy here. Thought I'd give you a video on what you should be working on this week. Working with functions, data types, and operators. That's what we're doing this week. And of course that's all about Chapter 2. And so this week you'll read Chapter 2 from the text and review the resources provided, which are right here, some JavaScript tutorials with functions, and a link about expressions and operators. Then provide an answer for the discussion question, which is right here, and complete Project 1, because we started Project 1 last week. Project 1 contains problems from both Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, and then in addition to be working on an individual case project as a continuation in every chapter. So let's take a look at what's in Chapter 2. Getting familiar with functions, data types, and operators with JavaScript. Functions themselves are procedures that could be put together in a block. And when we attach those to an object, they're called methods. But no matter how you look at it, they're a related group of JavaScript statements. It's just like if you were going to build a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You could say, make me a sandwich, and you know that there's a lot of steps to it. But in the end, what you come out with is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. When we create functions, what we're doing is listing all of the steps that might perform some certain task, like adding numbers together, or finding a square root, or saving all the data fields, or giving all the employees a 5% raise. There might be 10, 20, 30 statements that are executed, but all under one block that's given a name. When you name a function, you are taking all of those related statements and assigning a name to it so that you can call it whenever you need it and automatically do those statements that are associated with it. It lets you reuse this code. The syntax for writing a function within JavaScript is by using the keyword function and then giving a name of the function, providing any parameters that are necessary for the function to run, and then any statements that need to be executed. You can also create an anonymous function, which is one that is only used one time. Parameters are the arguments that are going to be necessary to complete the tasks that are involved with the statements. For example, if I was going to multiply two numbers together, then if I created a function called multiply2, my parameters would probably be two names of variables where I can find those values. Parameters are placed within the parentheses following the function name, and you can have more than one. Here's an example of calculate volume. Could be a function that takes the length, the width, and the height and uses that to fill in to an expression in order to return a result. And you see the example here. When you put functions in an external .js file, it's separate than the HTML file, and then you reference that file with the bottom of the body section. To execute any kind of a function, you call it according to its name, and what you put inside the parentheses are the actual values that are referenced in the statements within the function. Handling events, these are specific functions. Whenever you see a function has open and closed parentheses after it, and if that function is associated with an object, then it will be called a method. But they still look like this. In these examples that show here, we can specify a function as a value. So onClick equals show message means that when the user clicks on this particular submit button, it's going to run the JavaScript function called show message. You can also specify that as a property. Document.getElementById submit button .onClick equals show message, meaning that if you find that submit button on the page, if that's what it's called, and regard that element, when it is clicked, it will show message. The add event listener method. The add event listener method is going to check to see if something is done. An event listener will see what the user is doing. Adding an event listener is the most flexible because then that way HTML and JavaScript are different. Locating errors with the browser console. Unintentional coding mistakes may cause problems. If you use these keyboard shortcuts or the menu steps, you can find where the browser has errors with something that you might have typed in. Return statements are part of functions because return statements return a value that is a result of a function back to wherever that function was called. The function, average numbers, takes 3 values. Then it sums them together and divides those numbers by 3. Then it returns the result. So if you call the average numbers function and you set it equal to something, once it executes this function, it will return back to the point in the program that called it, and it will return 3 as a result. This brings up the point of variable scope. When a function is running, any variables that were declared, such as sum of numbers, are only available in that local area where they're used. In other words, when the function is not running, sum of numbers does not exist. Opposite of variables is global variables, opposite of local variables is global variables. Global variables are declared outside of a function and they're available anywhere. The problem with that is that can be a memory sink, and also it leaves data more vulnerable. Good programming techniques use the variable keyword when declaring variables, and it clarifies where and when the variable is used. This is an example of declaring a global variable. Variable color equals green. Then, when the function duplicate variable names, variable color equals purple, document.write, it's going to show the value as purple when you call that. But then when you're not in part of the function, after that statement is executed, as soon as this semicolon is over and it goes down to here, it's going to print green again because the global variable is set to green, but only in here is it locally modified. These are different examples of built-in JavaScript functions that are part of the object itself. Data types is the next section here. Working with data types defines the way that memory is stored as a variable within the memory of your computer. So for example, is it a number? Is it a Boolean, which takes in a logical value of true and false? A string, undefined or empty? The examples of assigned values here, variable state tax. If it's equal to a string, if it's equal to a number, you can see when it comes up to be undefined or null. Undefined and null are two different things. Null means that there's no usable value, but that it exists. And undefined means it's never been assigned a value. This shows the differences between strongly and loosely typed. And this is completely related to data types and variables because strong typed programming language require that you declare what type of variable it is when you create it. For example, if it's going to be an integer, you have to say it's integer. In loosely typed programming languages, the data types can change after they're declared, or they don't need to be declared at all. So JavaScript is what's called loosely typed because it will automatically determine the data type stored in a variable. So when you could create diff types, you see these examples that are on the screen right now. You don't have to say integer or floating point or Boolean or even null. You just type it in. The different data types that are supported by JavaScript and by most programming languages are integer and floating point. The difference between those is whether there's decimal places or not. Boolean values hold a very small part of memory, and they're used when making decisions or for comparing data. Here's an example of a use of Boolean values. If true and false, and where that could be applied. Strings is another data type. Strings have 0 or more characters, and they be used as literal values assigned to a variable. A string that doesn't have any characters is just considered null or undefined. When you create a string, you put quotations around it. You can surround a quoted string with single quotation marks or a single quote with double quotation marks. You can see the examples here. In working with strings, the document.write is using JavaScript to call on some HTML code, which should print a heading 1 that says speech at the Berlin Wall, excerpt. That HTML tag will be printed and then interpreted by the browser. Concatenation is the same as addition, only it is done for strings instead of numbers. When we use an assignment operator, that takes whatever's on the right side and adds it to whatever's on the left. Escape characters and sequences are used when you want to do something other than type the literal character that comes next. An escape sequence is going to give you an opportunity to do something like a backspace or a carriage return or new line or horizontal tab. And here are some examples in Table 2-4. In some of the operators that are used to build expressions within JavaScript include arithmetic operators, which perform all kinds of mathematical equations, assignment operators, which assign values to variables, not just the equal sign, comparison operators, which return Boolean values of less than, greater than, not equal to, logical operators of and, or, and not, which combine logic, string operators, which let you concatenate and compound concatenation assignment, and special operators that don't fit within other categories. Checking back to our page, the discussion is based on the different types of operators this week. So what is an expression? What is an operator? Explain the following types of operators: arithmetic, assignment, binary, compound concatenation, conditional, logical, postfix, prefix, relational, unary. There's lots of different operators that form expressions. What is operator precedence? Why does there need to be that order for the operators? Create some examples to demonstrate the use of operators and operator precedence. Okay, I don't need you to actually give me links to JavaScript pages here. I just want you to show me some examples of codes. So in your response, you could just type some examples. You don't have to have it functional on an HTML page. Oh, lots of stuff in this chapter. So you can see all the discussion of arithmetic operators and assignment operators, comparison and conditional operators, and logical operators, special operators, operator precedence. All of those pieces are what you're going to put into the discussion. So rather than going over it in this video, I'm going to give you a chance to find out the answers yourself. When you work on a discussion, you can work on it with other people, and I don't mind if you put in the responses and then reply and say, we worked together on this or something like that, so that two people can get credit for the same answers. But you're also welcome to work individually, and like previous weeks, you'll be required in this discussion to read what other people posted and give your responses. So that's it for this week. As always, send me an email if you have any questions, or if you're really starting to feel overwhelmed, might be a good time to make an appointment with the Multidisciplinary Student Success Center and talk to a tutor for half an hour to see if they can help you out. I hope you have a good week, and I'll talk to you next week, unless I talk to you before then. All right, bye-bye.